All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first Executive Insights podcast for 2023. My name is Mark Robinson. I'm the Dean for the School of Business here at Washington University of Science and Technology. And I am pleased to introduce to you one of my dearest Deloitte friends, a true innovator in every sense of the word, Dr. Ajit Kambil. Ajit, thank you for joining us on this podcast series.
Thank you, Mark. Looking forward to it.
Great. And we're here talking about Ajit's new book. Maybe you can see it,
Yes.
called The Leadership Accelerator. And I knew when I saw it on Amazon, I said, "Wow!" I knew the name, and I said, "The Leadership Accelerator. It's a playbook for transitioning into your new executive role." So I knew it was going to be a great book. And I just finished it yesterday. Man, what a great read it was. So congratulations on the publication.
Thank you, Mark.
So
It was a bit of a slog, but we got there.
writing a book like that, or any book for that matter, is a tedious and often tiresome process, right?
Process. Yep. It took me
But,
many years. I'm a slow writer.
but I did want to ask you, I looked at your LinkedIn profile. You've been at Deloitte for almost 20 years now. What a great tenure at a really, name brand company. But how did what was your career path from college to Deloitte? How did you make that transition?
Yeah. So, I was fortunate enough to go to MIT for college, and I was there for a long time. I went from undergrad through PhD, and I focused on information systems. So my first career was as a professor of information systems at New York University. And just about that time, the internet was just beginning to start becoming popular. So, I saw something. It was the Thinking Machines Wide Area Information Server sort of project. And I called up the person behind it and said, "This is really cool in terms of how it does search." So he said, "Why don't you do a project on the internet?" So I did a project on the internet, which was National Science Foundation sponsored, to
Wow.
put all the SEC data on the internet. And that led to creating e-commerce courses, probably the first ever in New York at a major university. And then that led to me being asked at that time by Anderson Consulting to join them to do e-commerce research and help transform their think tank. So I went to Accenture. It was then called Anderson Consulting. And then 6 years later, basically Deloitte wanted to create a new think tank. I came to Deloitte, then inherited the existing think tank. So, it's an unusual career. But I think the key thing to the career was that in each of these organizations, there was something transformational that I was able to create or do. At NYU, create e-commerce. At Accenture helped their think tank do some of the first Harvard Business Review articles and so forth. And what I want to say is be courageous throughout your career. Reach out to people. Ask them, if you find something really interesting, just like I reached out to Brewster Kahle about the wide area information services, reach out on things that you find really interesting and curious and be ready to learn. And sometimes that just opens opportunities you would never, ever expect.
Yeah,
you
exactly right. Exactly
know,
right. Yeah.
and if somebody said to me I'd have written a book on executive transitions, 20 years ago when I was more of a technologist,
Right.
I'd say, "Hey, what are you smoking?" Because if I hadn't been curious or I hadn't discovered that a lot of executive transitions don't work out so well, including one of my own, I wouldn't have solved for this. So I'd
Exactly.
say
Yeah.
be curious, be courageous, and be willing to reach out to people to learn more.
Yeah, that is great advice, Ajit. Thank you. I remember, I know I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and I came across, you're almost now 20 years at Deloitte. Wow, what a great tenure with a great company. And I remember when I was hired I came from ExxonMobil to Deloitte in the global energy and resources practice. And the partner I was supporting says, we need to start a thought leadership program. I said, well, who do I need to talk to? And everybody kept saying, Ajit Kambil, Ajit Kambil. So I said, you got to talk to the number one guy. And you were very gracious with me to take me under your wing and show me, what thought leadership was all about. But I know through your constant encouragement, the global energy and resources practice at Deloitte really started, perhaps not singly, but certainly it was a new era. Right. And I met you through Deloitte Research, and you've done some great research in the CFO program, which, has a lot of substance in your new book. So, that was a great way to start, my career. But, you have done so well in this new project. So the book is the Leadership Accelerator. And I wanted to talk with you about, I know you've done a lot of great research. Did you feel that you had enough research to write a book, or did the idea say, well, we should get all this great data, we should do something with it? Or did you see a gap in what's been written out there on the leadership, book circuit?
I think there's a bit of all three. So the first thing was, back in 2009, we knew that there was a high casualty rate in executives. I think there was a study from Heidrick and Struggles that said 40% of all new hires at the executive levels don't last in their role very long. That's a tremendous waste of human capital, right?
Yep.
And it's costly to companies. So we went out and did research saying, hey, what made you successful in a CFO role initially? And we found out that there were just these three things that you had to manage well: time, talent, and relationships, right? And that formed the core of an offering we created, the Transition Lab, which we've done thousands of now as a firm. So one thing, there was research at the beginning of this, and then there is what I call the continuous learning and refinement from executing, in my case, 350 of these transition labs, which are these full day sessions with one executive as a client, helping them transition into a new role. And then 4,000 we've done collectively. And what I realized were, there were a series of myths in the marketplace about transition. There's a lot of stuff written about the first 90 and the first 100 days.
Right.
And boy, most of the executives who come to our transition labs come after the first 90 days because 90 days is just too short to really get a handle on all the nuances of the company, get to know the key players, and to define what you have to do well for the future. So we felt that there was a real opportunity to share what we had learned and to scale the distribution of that knowledge through writing a book to a much broader audience at all levels going forward.
Right. That's one of I think the unique things about this book is that, as you say in the book, there's a lot of research gone into the CFO role.
Yeah.
I know you were heavily involved in that for many years, but I think there's a lot of similarities between roles in the C-suite, where your research now can be extrapolated further, right? Into other, CIOs, chief marketing officers, right? They seem to only have a 3 to 4 year tenure, which is very short. And so I think you do a great job in the book about busting some of these myths about, the 90-day plan. But as I think I recall in the book, you saying it's perhaps more like 12 to 18 months
Yeah. So the way you look at it is, it probably takes you 6 months to really get a handle on what's going on. And then you got 6 months to really put a foundation in place to move forward. I tell everybody, you're not hired for the status quo. Let's say the S&P doubles approximately every 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah, or at least for the last 30 years. You could say the average doubling time is about 8 years. So if you're above average, right, you got to help your company double its value in, let's say, 5 to 6 years.
Mhm.
Because if you're 8, you're just average, right?
Right. Right.
So, so you want to be above average. So you're not going to do that if you just deliver the status quo.
Right.
Most times you're going to have to do things that improve the performance of the company or contribute to its performance. But let's say you only have a 5-year run at the role based on that. Most CFOs are in that zone, some roles even lower. The first year, it takes time to get the most single important assets in place to help you do that. And
Right.
that's your team and your relationships. If you have to upgrade your team, it's very hard to do that in
Right.
less than a year. You got to evaluate people. You got to think about how you skill them up, if needed to
Right.
exit a few. All of that takes time. So it's kind of unrealistic, to say, let's go for quick wins.
Right.
I've done hundreds of C-suite interviews in preparation for transition labs. I can say less than a handful of the times have people said, I want a quick win. Usually they say to me, I want an executive who really listens, understands the issues, and then comes back with a solid foundation to deliver on the solutions to those issues. They're not asking for quick wins, they're asking for the right wins going forward.
That's a great
So,
point. And certainly in the book you talk about in most of these C-suite transitions, in most cases, as the new CEO or CFO, you are inherently inheriting a new team, and that seems
exactly.
to be at odds with every C-suite person wants to bring in their own team, but in many cases that's not possible. So now you have employees and managers and VPs who were there before you got there, and now you have to make those tough decisions about keeping people or trying to improve them or just finding new employees to replace them. And that's not, as you say, that's not done overnight.
It's not done overnight. And, it's really, you got to win over the team that you inherit.
Right.
Sometimes you got to make them the team that they ought to be.
Right.
I sometimes ask people in my transition lab, what do you want, a basketball team or a relay team? Everybody runs hard in their lane and then
Right.
hands the baton, and sometimes they are the basketball team. They're not flexible enough. They
Right.
to own their position, but to move where the field of play is, right?
Yeah.
So it takes a fair bit of work to build the team you want. But the important thing is this: after you're one, that team is your brand. You can be terrific as an individual,
Right.
but winning at business is a team sport.
Sure.
So ultimately, your team has to be the best it can be. Otherwise, you know, you're as good as the weakest link. Your brand
Right.
is effectively what your team defines it to be. So
Exactly.
making your team high performing in the first year is almost job number one for most
Right.
people.
Yeah. A very challenging process to say the least.